Jesus just completed a miracle in which he took one loaf of bread and fed over 4,000 people with 7 baskets of bread left over. Now, as the disciples are packing up to leave, they decide to just grab one of those loaves of bread before hopping into the boat. Upon reflecting on their decision, they decide that maybe one loaf isn't enough to feed 13 grown men. And then Jesus turns to them and says, "Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and of that of Herod." The disciples are confused because they think Jesus is talking about the one loaf of bread that they have. But we know better, right? Well, let's examine Jesus' metaphor. This is yeast. It is something that is used in bread. You add yeast into a ball of dough, and that little bit of yeast spreads throughout the entire ball, and when you bake it, the bread becomes nice and fluffy. So Jesus must be saying that if we want to become nice and fluffy, we need to not allow the wrong yeast to come into our lives and completely change us. Or something like that. If the disciples become like the Pharisees and like Herod, then they will become deaf to Jesus' words and they'll become blind to Jesus' actions. The disciples didn't get this from Jesus' words, and they responded to Jesus by saying, Jesus is talking about yeast because he knows that we forgot to bring enough bread for all of us. They did miss the point. They are, unfortunately, more like the Pharisees than they should be. And Jesus is saddened by this response. Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? Does Jesus ever fear going hungry? Did he feed over 5,000 people with just a few loaves of bread? How many baskets of bread did he collect after that miracle? 12! Do you still not understand? Jesus is the bread of life. He is all that we need. They can stop worrying about the bread that will fill their bellies, and the disciples can start focusing upon the bread that will fill their souls. This story is the beginning of how Jesus opens the eyes of the disciples. And if we pay attention, we can all have our eyes open too. Doesn't that sound nice?